They call it the place no one escapes. A prison built not just to contain the most dangerous inmates in America, but to break the idea of escape entirely. Officially, it's known as the United States Penitentiary Administrative Maximum Facility. Informally, ADX Florence, the Alcatraz of the Rockies. From the outside, it looks like a concrete fortress dropped in the middle of the Colorado desert. No surrounding houses, no walkable roads, just flat land stretching to the mountains, and a silence so heavy that guards say you can hear your heartbeat during night shifts. But the truth about ADX isn't in the concrete. It's not in the steel bars, the motion sensors, the patrol towers, the razor wire, or the locked doors. The truth is in the isolation. Because inside ADX Florence, prisoners don't just serve time. They serve silence. There's a long stretch of highway that leads toward the facility. On that road, the world becomes empty. No gas stations, no towns, just a widening desert that seems to push everything else away. For inmates being transported here, the trip is symbolic. They're watching the world slip farther behind them, mile after mile, until the prison appears like a gray blade cutting into the landscape. Most inmates sent to ADX already know what it means. This is the end of the line. The place where the federal system sends those considered too violent, too high risk, too notorious, or too unpredictable for any other prison. There are no second chances here. No population yards. No contact visits. Just a concrete world engineered for one purpose: control. When transport vans reach the final gate, the silence breaks for the first time. Not with voices, not with guards yelling, but with the metallic hum of electric gates, sliding open one barrier at a time. Each gate seals the inmate deeper into a world more restrictive than the last. Cameras track every angle. Microphones capture every whisper. Guards behind bulletproof glass watch every movement. Inside the intake hallway, there are no chaotic scenes, no loud inmates being processed. Everything is methodical, clinical, almost surgical. And then comes the walk. Long corridors, cold walls, doors that open only because someone, somewhere, pressed a button. Inmates describe feeling like they being absorbed into the building, as if the prison itself is swallowing them. A standard ADX cell is roughly 7 by 12 feet, smaller than a parking space. Everything is designed to be indestructible. A concrete bed with a thin mattress, a stainless steel sink, and toilet, a concrete desk, a small concrete stool, a tiny slit-like window. The window is angled upward, not outward. Inmates can see the sky, but not the horizon. They can't see the mountains, the desert, or any sign of life. Some psychologists have said the design itself sends a message. Look up, but don't look out. The door is solid steel, with a narrow slot used for food, restraints, and occasional communication. For many inmates, this is their home for 22 to 24 hours every single day. No roommates, no noise, no physical contact. Just the hum of the ventilation system and the distant echo of steel doors slamming shut somewhere down the hall. Daily life in ADX is built around one idea: reduce every chance for violence to zero. But the way they accomplish that is through routine, a rigid, repetitive cycle that never changes. Breakfast, delivered through the slot. No cafeteria, no human contact. Morning, inmates can read, write, pray, or pace the cell. Televisions are allowed in many units, but heavily regulated, with a limited set of educational and religious programs. Recreation, up to 1 hour per day, but even this depends on behavior and security classification. Recreation happens in what many inmates call the cage, a small concrete enclosure, sometimes outdoors, sometimes covered. No group exercise, no basketball courts, no weights, just a single inmate alone with a concrete wall and a patch of sky. Showers, escorted, controlled, monitored. Every movement inside ADX is supervised, logged, and tracked. What makes ADX different from other maximum security prisons is not the walls, but what happens to the mind inside those walls. In regular prisons, even the most dangerous units have noise, arguments, conversations, footsteps, radios. At ADX, the design absorbs sound. Some sections feel like standing inside a vacuum. Former inmates describe the silence as heavy, almost physical, like the walls themselves are pressing inward. One former prisoner said the quiet makes your thoughts louder than your voice. Another wrote that he once spoke out loud after months of silence, just to make sure he still could. Even guards admit the atmosphere is different. Some say the building feels too calm, like a place waiting for something to happen even though nothing ever does. ADX isn't one single block of cells. It's an entire system of layers, each one more restrictive than the last. 1. General population still solitary, but with controlled programs and limited privileges. 2. Intermediate units for inmates transitioning out of the most restrictive housing. 3. Special Security Unit, SSU, near complete isolation for high-profile or national security inmates. 4. H Unit, where communication with the outside world is nearly non-existent. Some of America's most notorious individuals have been housed here. 5. The Range, the highest security corridor, designed for inmates who have attacked staff, escaped from other prisons, or sparked systemic violence. These divisions allow the Bureau of Prisons to tighten or loosen restrictions based entirely on behavior. Some inmates gradually earn small freedoms, radio access, more recreation time, additional books. Others remain locked in near total isolation for years. The psychological toll. ADX Florence has been the subject of years of debate among human rights groups, psychologists, and former corrections officials. The core concern is isolation, not weeks, not months, but years of it. Research from major universities has shown that extreme solitary confinement can cause anxiety, depression, memory issues, hallucinations, sleep disruption, emotional numbness. Some inmates adapt, others unravel. Reports from court documents describe inmates pacing for hours, whispering to themselves, or staring at the ceiling for entire nights. Even inmates who arrive hardened and unshakable often change after long stays in solitary. A former federal warden once said, ADX doesn't break rules. It breaks routine. And routine is what keeps the mind steady. For correctional officers, ADX is unlike any other assignment. They don't walk casually among inmates. They operate gates remotely. They escort prisoners in full restraints. They communicate through intercoms and reinforced barriers. Training is extensive because the inmates held here include gang leaders, escape artists, and individuals involved in high-profile national cases. But the staff also face something unexpected: isolation of their own. Unlike busy prisons filled with movement and noise, ADX is quiet. Shifts are repetitive. Human interaction is limited to brief exchanges. One former officer described it as working in a place built to keep danger in, but also built to keep humanity out. There are countless myths about ADX. Hidden torture rooms, secret underground units, physical punishments. The reality is simpler, and in some ways more unsettling. Everything is by the book. Everything is legal. Everything is controlled. There are no hidden chambers, no secret experiments. Just silence, structure, and separation. What makes ADX terrifying isn't violence. It's the absence of it. It's not chaos. It's the overwhelming order. It's not fear of being attacked. It's fear of disappearing into a world where time has no shape, and days repeat so perfectly that memory blurs. But not every inmate stays in ADX forever. There's a program, quiet, little publicized, but crucial, that allows some inmates to work their way out of near-total isolation. A system of steps, a ladder out of the silence, a path known only to a handful of inmates and officials. The gates of ADX Florence were designed to hold the most dangerous inmates America has ever seen. But behind those reinforced walls lies another story, one that isn't told in newspapers or case files. A story about isolation, endurance, and the quiet battle for sanity. This is where the truth behind life inside ADX becomes undeniable. 1. The step-down ladder, a fragile path to hope. Inside a prison built for total separation, there exists one narrow corridor of light, the step-down program. For years, ADX operated with a simple premise. Inmates arrived, stayed in solitary, and rarely left. But pressure from courts and human rights groups pushed the system to introduce a structured path toward less restrictive living. The journey begins with a transitional unit where inmates, for the first time in years, may see another prisoner face-to-face. They're permitted limited group recreation, monitored conversations, and tightly controlled programs aimed at rebuilding social behavior. If they demonstrate stability, they can progress to more advanced phases, more hours outside the cell. Access to educational programs. Occasional phone calls. A chance, however small, to be transferred to a lower security facility. But progress isn't easy. One disciplinary infraction can undo months of advancement. Many inmates apply and are denied repeatedly. For some, the program becomes a test not of behavior, but of endurance. At ADX, hope exists, but it must be earned inch by inch, with no room for error. 2. The psychological toll. Isolation is the defining feature of ADX, but in extreme forms, it becomes something much more powerful and much more dangerous. Psychologists who have studied long-term solitary confinement warn of a predictable pattern of decline. Paranoia, memory loss, emotional withdrawal, hallucinations, severe depression, self-harm, psychosis. Many inmates spend 22 to 23 hours a day alone in a concrete room no larger than a parking space. Communication is limited to brief encounters with staff, muffled through steel doors and reinforced glass. Some prisoners adapt, others unravel. Reports over the years have described inmates yelling into the void for hours, pacing endlessly in circles, or losing their grip on time altogether. And for those with pre-existing mental illness, the damage can be life-altering. Despite psychiatric services being available, critics argue that isolation itself is the root problem. Treatment cannot thrive where contact is nearly non-existent. This is the silent cost of ADX. The human mind becomes another battlefield. 3. Lawsuits, reform, and a system under fire. As stories of psychological decline grew, ADX found itself at the center of national scrutiny. A major lawsuit filed against the Bureau of Prisons accused the facility of neglecting severely mentally ill inmates and failing to provide pathways out of solitary. The case forced the system to make reforms, expanded mental health screening, improved treatment plans, and transfers of some inmates to specialized facilities better equipped to handle psychiatric conditions. The step-down program was strengthened. Monitoring increased. Oversight intensified. Yet, even today, debates persist. Human rights groups continue to argue that prolonged solitary confinement, regardless of reforms, risks crossing the line into inhumane treatment. Federal officials maintain that ADX is reserved for those who pose extraordinary threats: prison gang leaders, terrorists, escape artists, and inmates responsible for high-profile murders behind bars. To them, the facility isn't a symbol of cruelty. It's a necessary tool. But the question remains, at what point does safety overshadow humanity? 4. The human reality, stories behind the steel. Statistics describe ADX as a fortress, but the lived experience of its inmates tells a more complex story. Some prisoners, after years of isolation, succeed in the step-down program. They rebuild discipline, regain limited privileges, and eventually leave the supermax units behind. For them, ADX becomes a chapter, not a life sentence. Others don't make it that far. Mental illness, despair, and the weight of silence crush their sense of self. Even when transferred out, the psychological scars follow them. Some describe difficulty adjusting to conversation, movement, even daylight. And then there are the staff, officers who work every day in absolute vigilance. They deal with inmates who may lash out, resist, or sink into despair. They walk hallways designed to suppress noise, emotion, and unpredictability. Many admit that the environment affects them too, a constant pressure to remain alert, detached, and controlled. In ADX, everyone pays a price. Some just pay it more quietly than others. 5. The final question: what does ADX really mean? When ADX Florence opened in 1994, it represented the pinnacle of American prison security, a facility built to contain the country's most dangerous individuals. A place where escape was impossible, violence preventable, and order absolute. 3 decades later, it represents something more: a national conversation about punishment, safety, justice, and human dignity. Supporters argue that ADX protects the public and other inmates from individuals who have proven themselves too dangerous for any other environment. Critics argue that extreme isolation erodes the very concept of rehabilitation and risks inflicting permanent psychological harm. Both sides agree on one truth: ADX Florence is unlike any other prison in the world. It is a place where silence is louder than screams, where days blur into nights and weeks into years, where the absence of sound, touch, and human connection becomes part of the sentence. ADX Florence was built to control the uncontrollable, but in doing so, it created a world where the walls don't just confine, they define. For some inmates, the path out is narrow but real. For others, the isolation becomes the ending. And in that divide lies the true story of ADX, a fortress of steel and concrete, and a mirror reflecting the cost of absolute security.